Yeah, this is John from All Points TV, and as everybody knows about the water situation here in Flint, it's pretty bad, and it's bad enough as it is without having misinformation and also stirring up the pot unnecessarily. And I'm not saying there isn't some need for some kind of legal action against the officials who are largely responsible for this. But anyway, everybody seems to be really hell-bent on sending Snyder to prison. Anyway, a day or two ago, I saw that our guest today, Mr. John Streby, he's a practicing attorney here in the Flint area, he responded with a pretty decent and pretty valid points about this rush to prosecute, and that's what we're going to start off with. And so anyway, thank you for joining me today, and you came up here very early, so I really appreciate your time with us.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be here, John.
So anyway, what are your thoughts about this? You posted it, and I was just wondering if you could kind of recall from what you posted, but there is this big rush to, prosecute Snyder, and he seems to be singled out more than the other people. Not only the emergency managers, but also I would say a lot of the people who are here on the ground, the EPA, the Department of Environmental Quality for the state of Michigan. There's other people too, but they just seem to be focusing largely this filmmaker, who's supposed to be from Flint, has been leading the charge. Mm-hmm. Why don't we start from there and see what your observations about that?
Well, what we're seeing is a lot of demagoguery, and demagogues always need a scapegoat. They don't want to take the time to provide detailed analyses of situations because the public doesn't have the patience or the intellect to necessarily listen to all that and try to understand it. But what we see is instead an attempt to make a scapegoat out of the governor because, for one thing, he's a white Republican, and the fact is that when you're playing the race card, as is being played with the claim that, well, this wouldn't have happened if this were Grand Rapids or Birmingham or some prosperous city. But because it's a city where we have about a 50% black population, there's racism involved here. It's partly because of the emergency manager law, they claim, which is also a racist law aimed at disenfranchising black voters. Well, the fact is that there were people at the decision-making stage, some of whom may be African American, most of whom I would guess are Democrats, that if we're going to lay blame, they would have to accept some of the blame too. But it makes it a little bit hard to play the race card when some of the culprits are themselves black people. So I think Michael Moore realized that, and so he figured, well, we got to shift the focus to the executive of the state, to Governor Snyder, and let's use as much imagery as possible. Let's talk about arresting him and so forth. And I think that is highly irresponsible. Now, Moore claimed in his rally back on Saturday that it was all very simple, that some aide came to the governor and said, well, it's going to cost us $100 a day for 3 months to resolve the problem. And the governor said, nope, that's too much money, basically to hell with the people of the city of Flint. Well, we all know that when you are talking about any sort of a situation where something has gone wrong, that usually there are a lot of people that are involved in the decision-making or the carrying out of the decisions. It's very, very rare that a tragedy or a disaster like this can be laid solely at the doorstep of one person. Look at how, as the example I used in one posting a few years ago, when Valerie Plame was outed as an undercover CIA operative. There was a suspicion that Vice President Cheney was involved. Well, you'd think that that'd be pretty simple. Either he outed her somehow or he didn't. And yet the investigation ended up consuming millions of dollars in attorney fees, and I don't think there was ever a resolution of whether he had outed her or not. He probably did, but he never was prosecuted. But the point is that when we're talking about something as complicated as the water crisis, who made the decisions, who carried them out, who was in a position where they should have spoken up, these things involve a lot of different players, and to just say, well, it's all Governor Snyder's fault because he was governor, I think is doing a grave disservice to the people of the city of Flint. And I think Michael Moore is being extremely irresponsible to do that.
Yeah, now I know he's good at making films and stirring up controversy, but I think he's really overstepped the bounds too. That he basically he's acting, and I think, as an advocate for some kind of legal action, which kind of puts him into my see it as some kind of being some kind of legal expert, which I certainly question that claim or that possibility. So, and I do agree with you. It is very partisan, and I don't say that Snyder didn't have any role in this. He didn't play. I think he did. But as you already alluded to, I think there are many players on this in this tragedy that have been established politicians or bureaucrats or officials throughout Southeast Michigan and have been in place for years. But why is he being singled out more than the rest of them? Let's face it, everybody thinks these people coming into office are are omniscient. They're going to have full knowledge about every issue that area is going through, and that's just patently absurd. You have people who are in those positions who come and brief you if something arises, or try, if you want to have the knowledge, they try to brief you or give you the right documents, but you don't have full knowledge. And I think this is basically their problem with him is basically A, he's a racist, and B, he's like this person who's just trying to shut down. He just wants to ignore the poor population of Flint. That I think just all the stuff you can't prove. They're making accusations that really lack evidence.
Well, I'd like to see Michael Moore put his money where his mouth is. I'm sure he would like to see lawsuits successfully prosecuted, but that sort of thing takes money. It takes a lot of expertise that you have to pay for. I'd like to see Michael Moore put up $1 million and offer that, make that available to the attorneys that are handling this class action suit, just so they don't have to dip into their pockets to fund this litigation, and so they can compete on a level playing field with whatever defendants are identified, which may include the state of Michigan and other players. But I don't see Michael Moore offering any money to help fund this litigation.
Now, as a professional in the legal profession, when you saw this big stirring in the pot, and him making this charge to arrest, what was your initial reaction? Just grandstanding, or was it kind of more egregious to you because you kind of, I would say, probably think you'd hold the due process, and all the things surrounding this is kind of sacred.
Well, let's talk about that. I'm glad you asked that question. First of all, the Governor Snyder is not going to be arrested until a whole bunch of procedural steps have been taken, such as, let's say, an investigation by law enforcement leading to an eventual request made to the county prosecutor, David Layton, that a warrant be issued for his arrest. Then if Mr. Layton decides to authorize a warrant, then a judge has to likewise authorize the warrant. And then and only then would it be possible to arrest Governor Snyder. But Michael Moore has this fairy tale conception of, I don't know who he proposes should go out and make this arrest, but again, he's just playing to the mob. He's pandering to public unhappiness over this scandal and making a scapegoat out of the governor.
See, and like I said, I'm not dismissing the potential that he had more to do with it than he wants to admit. Obviously, if anybody is facing legal action taken against them, they're going to deny it or try to obscure their involvement. But like I said, I think this part of my observation is that people involved in local government get elected. Pretty much anybody can get elected if you run enough times, or if you got enough people ready to pound on doors for you, you're going to get elected at some point. But we have this tendency to get people in office who really don't have the necessary backgrounds to make decisions, to actually move on something. They don't have, and then if they are doing, they're actually drawn from the experience of other people who are very flawed. And let's face it, there's been incompetence even when Williamson was mayor. There was a big gaffe there in the city attorney, and basically cost us, the city residents millions of dollars to pay. It's going to be paid off over years. I'm talking about the
Genesee Towers?
Genesee Towers and stuff.
Yes, of course.
So there's incompetence amongst, even the people who are allegedly the trained professionals who are supposed to handle this. And I think the problem is we keep on recycling the same people in different positions. And even when they didn't prove themselves all that adequate or all that competent, they just keep on putting them in. They elect them and put them in different offices. It's basically like a shell game, and I think that's probably a big issue, a big cause of a lot of this stuff we're seeing here, and also in Detroit and other places like that. Flint's not that unique in that respect, recycling of local politicians.
So what's happened in Flint, I think, is a case of the city has undergone such a dramatic downturn in its overall fortunes that anybody that's interested in politics and, let's say, who has the competence and the dedication and the sincerity to really make a positive difference, they're not likely to remain in Flint and run for local office. They're going to go out to the suburbs where more of the action is. So what's left in Flint from this void is just the people who are not as sincere, not as competent, not as dedicated, but are out would see politics as a way of personal aggrandizement and maybe making some money as well. So what we're seeing is the tipping point has been reached in Flint, where it's no longer possible for Flint to attract the top quality people to run for office, the top quality people to serve in administrative departmental head positions and that sort of thing. So what we're left with is, the second or third tier of people who aren't as good at getting the job done.
Now, you've been around the Flint area quite a bit, and quite a bit of your life, I think most of your life, right?
Yes.
And, I think you and I will agree. I think you've already said that. So you're pretty much saying the same thing with that statement you just got done finishing, that we're basically, I hate to say it, but, and, I'm not trying to be overly critical, but you give somebody a break, and you give them a chance, you vote them in office, and you just see their big lackluster performance, and then you say, I'm not going to vote for this person again. I mean, look at Woodrow Stanley was taken out of office as mayor, recalled, and then now he's, what is he, some rep or something like that? I mean,
well, he got elected to the county commission and then eventually to the state house of representatives.
Yeah, I mean, and I wasn't all that impressed by his performance as mayor. I mean, it's just, to me, it's like, and now you put him in a position where he has greater authority, greater budget, oversight and stuff like this. I'm like, it's mildly amused, but it's also like one of these comedy tragic things going on at the same time. I mean, the city and the county needs good leadership. People who are maybe sometimes very hard nosed. You have to have some people in there who are going to be kind of not so personable. You're going to have people who are not so, affable, but somebody who's competent. And and it seems like I think you and I agree on it. Who are you going to attract? The rate of pay here is not going to be as good. Let's face it. It's if they could work a miracle here, it'd be a big feather in their professional cap. But I mean, who wants to undertake this with the pressures and the general incompetence and the general, I would say, lackadaisical attitude here? I mean, I'd be very reluctant to take something if I was an upstarter, upcoming person, a professional, politician or lawyer or anything. I would not want to go here. This would not be the place I'd be gravitating towards.
Right, because the rewards just aren't great enough, and the obstacles are so formidable. One thing I wanted to go back to just briefly is that this whole idea of arresting Governor Snyder that we haven't touched on is the question of whether just a mistake, even a gross mistake that might have been made on his part, gives rise to criminal liability. Now remember, the criminal justice system is only one component, one way of several to hold people responsible. We also have the civil court system where you're sued for monetary damages. We also have recalls where a governor, I presume, can be recalled or just voted out of office the next time. Of course, Snyder is term limited out. But it's a quantum leap for Michael Moore to think that whatever Governor Snyder did, no matter how ill-advised it might have been, no matter how careless it might have been, rises to the level of a crime as opposed to a civil wrong that can be redressed by the civil court system. So again, I think we're seeing a lot of demagogery here, a lot of fomenting of public anger without really an understanding on the part of Mr. Moore about what really goes into a criminal prosecution.
See, a lot of people talk to me, and I'd say I can see where Michael Moore can be considered a celebrity by some people, and he's done well. And some people have said that basically me having a studio is basically me trying at my attempt to emulate him, and that's far from the truth. I mean, that wasn't the intention when we started this. Actually, I let people come in here and actually say something, and respond to the questions and don't do the creative edit like he's been known to do. Inserting the same answers he give, when they gave to him when he was on set with them or he was in place, and then going back and insert him asking something else, and the response seems so bizarre and off the wall. He's done that, several times. He cuts out a lot of stuff, and I just think that's irresponsible. I just don't. I know maybe I don't get it. I admit I don't get what his purpose is in his variety of filmmaking. I would say I call it a mockumentary. And I don't call it a documentary because documentaries mean at least you have some shred of truth, and there is a shred of truth to his. But I mean, the way he manipulates facts and changes the timeline or jumps around and fuzzes that up deliberately, I have a real problem with that. I think it's irresponsible. I think it's just arrogant.
Well, I think that was one of the criticisms of Roger and me, was that he did invert the sequence of events, particularly with respect to the closing of Flint factories and the imploding of them with the opening of the Water Street Pavilion. He had the order reversed. And when you're making a documentary, you shouldn't be doing that. And if you are doing it, you shouldn't call it a documentary.
I mean, and there's some people tell me that because you got people here just basically, he's a local boy, dead good, and they want to gravitate, they want to find, and they like him. They believe in his politics, they believe in his mentality. I can't. I mean, I'm blue collar, but I mean, and I don't even know how to relate to people like Rick Snyder. He's a multimillionaire. I don't think he was all that great of a CEO. I mean, I had real problems with him running for governor. I think he ran against Virg Monero at one point, though, and I didn't really like him either that much. I mean, basically it's like 230 million people in this country, and who we get for presidents are people to rehash and have some real serious baggage. We get those put up on us. I mean, it still remains who's good to say the Republicans, but it's probably going to be. One of the front runners now has got a lot of baggage, in the Democratic side is Hillary. And after 200 we got 300 million people plus in this country, and we keep on getting like local problem. We still getting this recycled bunch of failures, incompetence, corrupt, and just arrogant. They're so arrogant about their performance, and people just buy that as it means it's like they're good at what they're doing. They're good at being arrogant, but they're not good at delivering the goods. What their intended job is.
Right. Well, Hillary Clinton has got a tremendous amount of baggage, and I was just watching something on Facebook this morning. A book has come out about how she was the enabler and the surrogate bully on behalf of her husband to a whole bunch of incidents of not just consensual sexual relationships between Bill and various women, but where he would actually assault women, where it wasn't a matter of consent. It was a matter of physical assault. And then she would step in and help basically intimidate the women to make sure that they kept quiet. And most of them did. And then, of course, there's the Monica Lewinsky situation where I think it would have been principled for Hillary to have said, well, Bill, I'm not going to leave you, I'm not going to divorce you, but I am certainly not going to go to bat for you on this Monica thing. We're not going to destroy this young woman's life. You've done enough damage to her already. I'm just going to take a neutral stance. But oh no, she goes out on the TV and radio and talks about the vast right-wing conspiracy. She referred to Monica Lewinsky as, I think, a narcissistic bimbo. This is the way Hillary operates. And whether you like Bill's service as president or not, the fact is that he was a serial sexual abuser of women, and she was his enabler.
Yeah, I know that kind of branches into. Actually, some people hear that comment and say that what's that have to do with the water crisis in here in Flint, Michigan? But I can see as overall, basically, there's two sets of standards. The Republicans, the conservatives, or whatever are held with way greater accountability and expectations than the Democrats. Matter of fact, they bend over backwards to accommodate very bad behavior on behalf of the Democrats. And I grew up in an area here. I mean, largely Democrat, and like I said, I'm not rich enough to declare myself as a Republican fully, because that's the mindset that's still here. You got to be rich to be a good Republican, and that's who they care about. But I have a hard time seeing that. I can't really defend Snyder, but I think that the point you're making too is there's this railroading attempt, just to railroad him into a prison, or I think it's just so. They're already putting out memes of him wearing orange jumpsuits for prison and stuff. I mean, okay, I don't like when they do that with Obama on the memes, because basically I know there's much more involved in getting that done, and they're playing fast and loose with people's lives, people's careers, people's let's face it, you have a personal setback, a professional setback, it's going to have a devastating effect in your personal relationships with people. And let's face it, as much as I dislike politicians, I do think they're narcissistic. I think they're largely sociopaths. But even all that, I'm very hesitant to abuse power. And it seems like Michael Moore, he doesn't like people being shut out because of their lack of money, but he seems to want people persecuted, and I'd say persecuted, solely because they have more money. I mean, that's just as egregious to me as being able to railroad a poor person because they don't have the money to mount defense, to pay for a good defense for themselves. I actually have this real bizarre idea that you can have some kind of form of try to go for justice, and that's what they're not doing. It's just they're not even trying to establish any kind of. They're not even allowed the presentation of facts. They just want to jump in the bag. Let's arrest Snyder. Let's arrest Snyder. Well, after you arrest him, that doesn't mean conviction automatically. So you basically, what's the point of arresting somebody until you can see if you got a case?
Well, that's another thing that needs to be pointed out is that if this was to be done at all, it's going to take months and months of investigation. There's going to have to be a blue ribbon commission perhaps established. And as I pointed out on Facebook, if there were such a commission established, you'd want to pick people with good judgment, with a lot of integrity, a lot of rectitude, which would exclude Michael Moore as from participation in such a commission. But the commission would need to have authority to subpoena people, maybe to grant immunity from prosecution to get people to talk. And at the end of the day, there could be a whole lot of recommendations or findings made. Now, maybe this commission should be in the form of a grand jury. Who knows? But I don't see our prosecutor here, David Layton, jumping on the criminal bandwagon. Another thing that I think people are overlooking when we talk about arresting Governor Snyder is what is this doing to the prestige of the state of Michigan? If our state resembles a banana republic where leaders come and go, they end up being arrested, thrown in jail, some other leader takes over. We need to be concerned about the future of the state of Michigan, the prestige, the ability to attract businesses, and anything that makes it look like our government is totally incompetent and our governor himself is about to be put in handcuffs and perp walked out of the Capitol does not help the state of Michigan as a whole.
Now, another thing is too is like I know that they're going to point to Kwame Kilpatrick, the now imprisoned former mayor of Detroit, but they did take a long time before they put him in prison. I mean, to build a case against him, he did have his days in court. So it was, and you can't say, I think he had deep pockets. I don't think they can actually use the excuse that he didn't have money enough for a proper legal defense.
Well, sure, I think he ended up with a court-appointed lawyer who now he's trying to throw that lawyer under the bus. He's so far not succeeded, but his whole appeal, I think, was based on the idea that his lawyer had some sort of conflict of interest. But remember, Kwame Kilpatrick was involved directly, not indirectly, not through subordinates, but he was directly involved in various shakedowns of contractors and other types of schemes that were done to enrich him. This is not a case of indifference or that sort of thing that's alleged against Snyder. This was a case of Kwame Kilpatrick trying to turn the mayor's office into a personal cash cow, which it looks like he started in right from the day that he took office. And so finally, after years of this, the chickens came home to roost for Mr. Kilpatrick, and I think the evidence against him was so strong that even his most fervent supporters have stopped short of playing the race card.
Yes, that's just. If you lobby enough for the job and you get the people behind you, you get the grassroots support, you get elected, and it's all grassroots because you talk about a mayoral election. And I guess there could be a chance for some outsiders to try to influence the outcome of that too. Like Detroit still, even though it's economically really devastated, they still have a sizable economy. We do. One of the economists at U of M says that too. It's like Genesee County, for example, is really devastated, but we actually still have more of an economy and product and stuff than some countries that are considered third world. So there's still money here. There's also, I guess, outsiders could try to influence the outcome of a mayoral election in Detroit. So that could say the corruption. But I think overall, Michigan, Southeast Michigan, and that's where I know. By the way, I was surprised to find out that he didn't have deep pockets and he did take a public defender, Kyle Kilpatrick. I thought that he probably had, ace in his up his sleeve and had plenty of money to deal with this, but I'm surprised to hear that. Now it's like Snyder does have money to mount a defense, and he's got, I don't know how much the GOP would come up with him because he's one of theirs to actually help him out. Do you think the GOP would come to the rescue to support Snyder in this instance, or what?
I don't really know, but I think that if he were charged, which I think is not going to happen, but if somehow he and along a bunch of other lower-level people were all charged criminally. Snyder would hire the best lawyers to defend him, and I think the case would probably, against him, would be thrown out on a pretrial motion. He would never stand trial because, again, the question of whether an executive, whether it's a corporation, a corporate executive versus a state executive, can be charged criminally with wrongdoing committed by subordinates. That's a serious question that Michael Moore doesn't want to bother to deal with.
Yeah, well, it's like, you and I both agree on that he's this wannabe law expert. He isn't. It's a reactionary thing. If they want to say reactionary, I would definitely say that's applicable here in this case with Michael Moore. I mean, and I'm not trying, I don't know how the level of culpability for Snyder. I don't. I basically am willing to say, hey, if he's done something significant, it wasn't major, it was solely upon him, then that's, fine, arrest him, put him on trial. But I just can't. It's like another thing is too. He did inherit a problem. I mean, they always said that for Barack Obama on the national level. He inherited the mess that Bush did, and that's granted. I mean, I don't know anybody who doesn't, anybody in public office who doesn't inherit somebody else's mess, or even some good things like Bill Clinton, and he inherited some good things that are going on, and he just happened to be now that's given the credit for it. I didn't like Bush 1 or Bush 2, but I mean, some things are rolling because of Congress at that time that actually did stop a lot of bad things, and he got the credit for it. So it's like Snyder's getting blamed for something that could have been set up during the Grand Home administration. And she was in there for 2 terms as well. So I mean, another thing is too. I mean, the city officials here locally basically. If I was a city official, I would look down the road and say, well, we're losing money, so we'll see what we're going to do with the money we do have now. I think there's some bad prioritization. They made bad choices for spending money. I don't know how much they could have done with what they had, but I would try to do something to address, the problem of dealing with Detroit water supply and, the rising costs and that. I would have tried to look at the infrastructure, see what needed. There's federal funds there. I mean, let's face it, we're rebuilding other countries. Why can't we rebuild our own cities? I think that's an absurd thing too, that we don't. But I mean, these politicians who have been placed for 20, 30 years, all I would say had some kind of hand or some kind of are linked to this problem we're now dealing with. But I don't think people like Moore are going to even try to consider that possibility.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I don't know what extent. I think it's just a knee-jerk reaction, and his ilk are always consider themselves more intelligent, more intellectual, and less responsive and just less emotional. But I see this as basically just an emotional response. I don't see. And the thing is, I've seen people out there who are professionals, who are in the legal system, who are now chiming in and saying and going in on the same side of Michael Moore. And like I said, again, I can't emphasize enough. I don't know the total responsibility that he might have, Snyder.
Well, I think that any lawyer who advocates arresting Governor Snyder should turn in his bar card. That's something that goes so far against the grain of what lawyers are supposed to stand for. That, again, any lawyer that would advocate that has no understanding of the criminal system and no understanding of the presumption of innocence and has a poor understanding of public relations and demagogery and so forth.
Now, I wanted to wrap this up before 30 minutes, but as a practicing attorney, and I want to keep on repeating this. So you are a practicing attorney. You've been one in practice for close to 40 years, right?
Yes.
So you've went through you've did different types of cases. You said you did some criminal cases as well, right? You worked with that some. So this is I bet you as a professional, one who's seen the profession kind of degrade, especially in this area, in this town, in this county. What advice would you want to see? Do you have a shred that there's some possible hope that you could actually reach somebody and say, listen, just wait till the facts are in before you try to make an arrest? And even if you were totally convinced that Snyder was culpable, had a big hand in this, I think like most lawyers, if you want to build a case, you want to make sure you're not basically firing prematurely.
That's right.
Yeah.
If somebody, let's say, and of course the Attorney General is a Republican, David Layton is a Democrat, but I think that he's got enough good judgment and political sense to know that this is not a cause that he wants to sign on to, because there's certainly the end result is most likely to be no one charging of Governor Snyder, but just charging a lot of subordinate people, local people, many of them African American. So I don't think that Mr. Layton wants to jump into that bandwagon. But I think that there's not going to be an arrest of Governor Snyder at all until this whole thing is thoroughly investigated. To do anything to the contrary would just be political suicide for whatever prosecutor would attempt it. And I know Mr. Layton is not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, at least as things stand right now. However, if, let's say, the decision is made, we're going to investigate this to the hilt, we're going to charge all the people that had anything to do with this incomprehensibly bad series of decisions, and if that means that 10 or 15 different people end up in the dock being charged criminally, so be it. I could support that. I think that there does need to be more accountability, and I've preached this on Facebook over and over, is that right now we have a whole set of laws that essentially confer governmental immunity to people, to government itself, and to people that work for government. When they get sued, their bills are picked up by the unit of government that they work for. They don't have to worry about going out and hiring private lawyers. On the other hand, a private business like me, I'm responsible for everything that I do. I can be sued for everything I do. I maintain insurance so that if I do get sued, I'm protected. On the other hand, if you work for government, you don't have to worry. So I think that when you have removed personal liability and personal accountability from the equation, that encourages reckless behavior.
I agree. I mean, I really do. I mean, it's like basically you de-incentivize them doing the job. I mean, and that's what they've done. I mean, and the thing is, let's face it, we need people in those positions. We certainly don't want them to become martyrs. We don't want them to be hung out to dry unnecessarily. But there is certain functions they have to fill and complete, and there's many of them from what I'm seeing, somebody down the road, several people, and I would have to be, in my opinion. I can't believe it was just one person to, drop the ball. Or drop the balls there, so to speak. They just didn't carry it as far as they should have. And so I think that's I think you have to look at that and say, look, let's get all our ducks in a row. We make sure we got we find a thread, and where the thread got cut, severed. Let's keep on doing that. I mean, like I said, that's just a knee-jerk response with Michael Moore is advocating and others. And, it's like, I basically think that, I want somebody, if there's somebody responsible for it, or people's responsible, a group of people, I want them to do whatever the law permits us to do. But I mean, everybody else wants clemency when they think when they're on the hook, for something. They want, a way out. They want some kind of, possible amnesty or forgiveness, or, let it be, the charges being dropped to lesser charges and stuff. So, I mean, and it is bad. It's horrific. But I just can't believe it. It's like this big plan. Snyder rolled right into office, and he had this plan to do this. I have a hard time with that. I really do, because I don't see what good it would do him to do this. I mean, for one thing, what would he financially to gain? What he finances? I don't see that obviously, the man's got money already. How much more would he need? Why would he take that risk? I just can't see him taking that risk. And to have this total flippant attitude of like he doesn't care about anybody in the cities, I think that's kind of bizarre too.
Well, I think that the word murder is being used far too recklessly here. But the fact is that anybody that's in an executive position has to rely on the advice of their subordinates. If their subordinates prove to be incompetent or indifferent, that's unfortunate. That doesn't mean you prosecute somebody. You don't criminalize hiring an unworthy subordinate. You may recall them. You may vote them out of office the next time they're up. But to make that into a crime is again, quite a quantum leap. And one other thing I'd like to point out is that we need to be concerned about activist prosecutors, because the same activist prosecutor that goes against the bad guys today, he might be using the power of office to railroad the good guys next year. So the prosecutor has vast powers. He's generally, in a community like Flint, the county prosecutor is the most powerful man in government. He has the ability to destroy somebody's life. hopefully if he destroys somebody's life, it's a person that has that coming. But the power of office can be exercised irresponsibly. And again, so if we're advocating prosecutors who try to pave new paths and blaze new trails in criminal responsibility and hold people criminally responsible for what normally would just be considered a civil cause of action, beware that can be used against those who we consider the good guys if the prosecutor doesn't like them next month, next year.
Yeah, I think the point that somebody made, it was on a TV show, but I think it was one about legal problems, and basically, so you got to protect, you got to have this like zeal to protect people who you might think might be guilty, but you want to wait till the evidence is presented, not because you have this love for these people, because you got to base it more on a self-interest thing, because you could be in that. I think that's kind of so on the same vein that you're talking about. You got to, a real aggressive prosecutor might be really good for this with now this villain you want to go after, but he's just as liable to come against you. And if you're not a person, let's face it, Snyder can take it. Basically, economically, a lot more than the rest of the people that live in the streets of Flint, any of these streets in the Flint area. So, I mean, basically, that's where you got to worry about. You got to worry about, hey, you might not be as protected or as ensconced or as insulated as the people they're aiming at now. And if they still have the zeal to go after them, you're nothing in their sights. They don't care if they flatten you totally and you're never heard from again. And I think that's it's a cautionary tale. It is got to be self-interest. It's not noble. Say, well, God, this might happen to me, so that's why I don't want it to done to somebody else. But I think that's far more intelligent and far more realistic to expect that kind of motivation than this noble thing about serving true justice in the American way, whatever that is. I mean, you got to basically put yourself in their shoes, and I think that's where you got to really. I say that's what I would tell people on this in this case. To go do that way, be that way, consider it that way. Mm-hmm. So anyway, before we wrap this up, is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners with? Your observations or your warning, if you have any.
Well, I guess I'd like to throw out the question of when you listen to somebody like Michael Moore, consider what dog does he have in this fight? What benefit does he hope to derive from it? Well, he's a man who thrives on publicity and on being outlandish. He's done very well with it. For somebody as physically unattractive as he is, who dresses the way he does, he's done extremely well. In his case is quite unusual, but you have to give the man plenty of credit. He's taken his own, you might say, disadvantages and parlayed them into a supreme advantage. He also benefited by, I think, just a stroke of good luck when he made Roger and Me, and that was immediately picked up by Warner Brothers, and he became an overnight millionaire. But the fact is that we are now talking about fanning the flames of hatred against and scapegoating against the governor, who doesn't deserve this. Whether you voted for him or not doesn't matter, because if Governor Snyder can be abused and hounded today, beware of who it might be tomorrow that gets the same sort of treatment. So I think that it's irresponsible to talk in these terms, like we're going to arrest the governor and lead him out of the Capitol in handcuffs. I think it's time that we start talking about prosecuting or investigating the matter first thoroughly and identifying everybody at the local level who was involved in this, figuring out what went wrong with the process, coming up with really like a white paper of why things went wrong, and above all, what we can do to assure that this won't happen again. Because we can't, our city cannot take another crisis like this.
No, definitely not. Well, again, I'd like to thank you for taking some time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today. And I also urge you to come back. If there's anything you want to bring to the public's attention and you really feel passionate about, definitely contact us. We're working for get you to come here again. And also, I encourage people who want to challenge what we stated here to come in and bring people on your side. I mean, we are All Points TV, and that's what we're encouraging. I don't think that's ever been done in this city. I mean, it's usually you got to read one paper to do this or this one. I think now is the time that we can actually be representative of All Points. Thanks again for showing up, John, and I'm glad you're here.
You're very welcome.